Welcome to NFT Sundays, a weekly conversation around art and technology, brought to you by DMINTI and the Museum of Crypto Art. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our next installment of NFT Sundays with famed Metaverse Architect, Untitled XYZ. Thank you, Untitled, for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you, my dear friend.
Thank you so much, Colborn. Thanks for having me and for the generous introduction there.
It's not without its, factual basis. So before we, get into that, I would just, love to hear from you an introduction about yourself, what your discipline is, what, your role in this crazy NFT world is, and how you came to be here.
Sure, it's a great question. Well, to start, my name is Kirk Finkel, or Untitled XYZ. I'm an architect by background, and in this crazy world we live in, I'm a virtual architect, artist, kind of designer, and it's been an interesting few years, as it is, I think, for most people who have entered this space. But I'm coming in from a traditional architecture background. Prior to NFTs, prior to crypto art, I was working in a traditional architecture firm doing urban design projects and architecture projects, and really sort of stumbled into the space like most people, just through kind of hearing different things, doing some research, being curious. And for me, it was really, really compelling from the get-go. I was just fascinated with what blockchain technology was offering and had this promise of offering, even if at the time, and this was 2016, there wasn't that much built yet for creatives, but there was this kind of discussion and promise about it being this more democratized infrastructure for people to participate and cooperate with one another in different ways. And at the time, I was doing public space projects. I was doing plaza designs nationally and internationally, just in different parts of the world. And it always came down to kind of a public discussion about what a public space should be in a community or in a neighborhood. And a lot of those conversations really resonated into the blockchain world for me. It felt like people were collaborating on open source infrastructure. It was very appealing in that respect. And in my professional practice, architecture is a very siloed profession for the most part, despite it being this kind of, you're creating things for the public. A lot of the process is very much behind closed doors and with a very select number of stakeholders. And I think not all architecture is practiced that way, but by and large, it's not as connected. So for me, just to kind of sum it up, I think blockchain looked like a different path. It looked like something that could be a little bit more interactive and something that could break down those silos.
And I've been hearing that, of course, a lot, right? And it's no secret that for architects in major cities, right, you find yourself working exhausting, surgeon level hours, and it's never your design and vision, right? So
right.
Let's just start there. How has NFT as a medium, how has Metaverse as a medium really empowered you to create and live the practice that you desire?
Well, it's certainly, I never ever thought that it would, it's incredible what's developed over the last few years. I think it's really a result of so many pre-existing creative systems just didn't work for people. It wasn't empowering. It wasn't agile enough. It wasn't connected enough. And I think, you talk about architecture, it's probably one of the most conservative professions out there. It hasn't changed in thousands of years.
Right.
It's, the biggest change that it had recently was going from a drafting desk to AutoCAD to digital. But it's the same thing. It's still, you're drawing a line. It's just a digital line versus a physical one. So I think the profession itself is really rooted in traditional values. And I think for me, the NFT world offered so much creative freedom, which was the kind of hook where you could sort of, you can do your own thing and create really sort of freely. But I think what excited me most and still does about the metaverse is connectivity. You can create a space alongside other people that are of different backgrounds and professions than you or skill sets. But then you can also experience these spaces really quickly in lots of different iterations with people all over the world. And that's not something you really get in the same way with a physical architecture project. Even though it is a public project in most cases, it's not going to be this space that can be accessed by people all over the world. You're very limited to where you are. So if you're designing a building in New York, you're, New York's kind of maybe more of an international example, but you're still very much limited to who can access that space and who it is ultimately for. And I think what metaverse builders and architecture does is it just creates an incredible amount of connectivity between people. And that's just really exciting for me as a designer.
Oh man, a million, like a million questions for you because, of course, and we see this thematically again and again, it's about people coming together from all over the world into like a borderless digital land, right?
Right.
And when I think about it, is never just like the NFT as the JPEG image on the screen. Like it needs the architectural and it needs the design concept. Exactly. It is this like incredible fusion of what can be in these spaces. And like I today am dreaming of that time in 5 to 10 years when you and I are going to be like walking through your building. There's going to be like the art on the walls and we're having the same conversation. There was such a big leap in the idea of like sending an NFT to cold storage or bringing it into blockchain based metaverse. So maybe you want to kind of like talk about the importance of like NFT and art and like the harmonious union that you see between the work that you do and the way that artists are creating in this space.
Yeah, I think it's a really, I mean, that's what it is. It's a kind of harmonious connection between different disciplines. And I think NFTs as a medium is just hyper connected in a way that we've never really been able to experience before, I don't think. And I think, for me, I love creating art as well as architecture, and I think they feed one another in different ways. And I see a lot of people doing that and experimenting. There's this kind of like rapid fire experimentation that can happen with NFTs and digital art and digital architecture. That is just, it's hyper exposed. I think with an NFT, you're creating something that's so public and so accessible. Whether it's kind of put up in a 3D space for people to explore or just shared on Twitter for people to have a conversation about. But what I like about this medium is that it's creating a hive mind around these kind of, around art, around creativity, and exposes it to so many people of different backgrounds and skill sets that I think we really don't know how this conversation is going to unfold yet. It's still so early. We're in the kind of big bang phase. And, yeah, I think it's just incredibly exciting. And NFTs are just the spark that started this, but I think it's going to evolve in crazy ways over the next few years. It's hard to know.
I am obsessed with this idea of like this hive mind concept and this rapid learning and like rapid iterating that we're all doing, because suddenly the practice is not like reserved for an individual, but it is more communal.
Yeah.
And when I was, building exhibitions and designs, what I just loved and got so motivated by was that like I could buy an artwork I could have like an idea of a theme for like the collection that I want to see. I could have an idea for how I wanted to show and display it. And then by that night, like I could have a mock-up of that building in space and step into it in 3D. So, I mean, just maybe real quick touch on like how revolutionary this process is to be able to like create, iterate, step inside, step back out, because obviously in physical architecture you get just one chance.
You get one shot, and physical architecture. It's generational. It's
Yeah.
not iterative on a daily or weekly basis like that. I mean, you might go through iterations in the process of creating a building, but what's built is, it's a 10-year process, and it's ideally designed to last 100 years. I think the way in which we're just programmed now to absorb, retain, reject, accept information, it's so rapid fire, and it's such a different pace than has ever been before, that I think we're starting to see how that manifests physically in the environments that people want to kind of connect through. I think the metaverse is one of those artifacts of that kind of like rapid fire sort of desire for
Yeah.
spaces that are like really, really agile and can move quickly with the conversation. So yeah, what you're saying, I think that's like such a powerful, I think that's such a powerful thing about this space. And I think it's underestimated in a lot of ways by more traditional kind of institutions that want to take, or not want to, maybe are used to taking years to put together a show, or decades to put together a building, or a century to put together a city. I think that's like, the scales of this really resonate out, and I think we're still seeing this unfold, and it's really exciting to see.
And I know you love duality, and this is something that super excites me as well, is that like when you step into a VR world or VR environment like Somnium Space, or even Crypto Voxels or Decentraland, like I love the like architectural detritus and like the weird failed experiments that still exist from the beginning of time, like even stuff that I have on my land, and new buildings pop up and things are constantly like evolving and changing, and to just like step into these worlds and explore is a kind of artistic journey in itself. And there's just like it's like a world constantly filled with all these strange and random Easter eggs.
And I think that's something about when you walk into one of these environments like Somnium or Crypto Voxels, or Decentra, anywhere, I love that you see this weird early stuff,
Yeah.
which is like, I was looking the other day at some early screenshots I had from Crypto Voxels in like 2018, and the stuff that people just would drop in there, people were just figuring out what this was.
Yeah.
It was very raw. It was very reactive. And I think now, I'm a little bit worried that some of this stuff is getting like gentrified and taken away because,
Yeah.
bigger companies are coming in and buying land and putting down kind of, copy pastes of the real world, and taking over those kinds of things that were just sort of reactive to what was there at the time. So
I
maybe we need to create a DAO to like conserve the metaverse or something.
I forgot who it was, but this was, pretty early on. I remember like this great Crypto Voxels like land war that these two people were having, where like one put up a brick wall and one like wrote in graffiti like "Don't cover my view," and they went like back and forth, and it's just like yeah, all these stories of how like the design has informed, and fly around Crypto Voxels and you'll see right away how the architecture just like kind of captures the history. It's doing it so rapid fire, almost like a like an archive of the web pages from the 1990s. I agree that there needs to be kind of like a conservation effort to, capture some of these early buildings and these early efforts.
Yeah, we need like a time machine where you can kind of, in the same way you could look at Google Earth or something over time, it would be amazing to walk through
a
crypto voxels
parcel
through
a
years.
parcel built, right? Like how that parcel grew and evolved. Super cool. I kind of wanted to certainly touch on a lot of the surreal elements that you bring both into your artwork and into your metaverse designs. I love like the Escher stairs, or like the stairs to nowhere, the columns. Do you want to speak on kind of like what those symbols and structures represent to you? Because for me, it's like a taking of the classical and reinterpreting them through like a surrealistic lens. But it's so empowering because you can do that.
Absolutely. I think that the metaverse has this kind of duality to it of people taking familiar language from the real world and inserting it in. And sometimes I think that's done too much or too comprehensively. But then, with my work, I try to pull different motifs or different kind of visual cues of the real world, like a staircase or an archway, and collage these in different ways that kind of looks to explore what the space can ultimately be or what it can do. And I think these visual cues can be really powerful. I really love staircases and archways because it immediately gives you a sense of scale. It gives you a sense of orientation and direction. And there's not a lot of kind of like patterns that can do that so quickly. If you're putting on a headset in a virtual world, it like immediately gives you cues of what to expect in this space.
Further, I think to like your creativity is you never kind of took architecture to be just one form, right? For
Right.
you, it was not just about building in the metaverse. You were exceptional at it, of course, but like you have also made architecture like NFTs, MP4s, JPEGs. Even that async piece is incredibly revolutionary.
I think what we talk about this a lot, where it's like this using the process of creating as part of the product, like really drawing out the kind of conversation that happens, manifesting that as kind of like a physical artifact. I don't know if I'm creating buildings. I think I'm creating kind of public spaces in some ways, or environments that maybe have the familiarity of some types of buildings, but then do and accomplish other things. Because I think if it's virtual, I don't know if you can even call them buildings, because they don't provide shelter. They provide kind of an environment for you, or an experience. But anyway, that maybe is another thread. But I think with the Form Farm project on async art, I was really interested in visualizing or creating like a DAO as an art form. So how can you visualize a kind of communication between different collectors who all, if they can own a piece simultaneously, what will they decide? I think what's beautiful about async art is they're creating a new type of art form that, most people are just sort of kind of copying and pasting their Instagram feeds into NFTs, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what I love about what async art is doing is they've said we can create a different, more complex kind of medium out of this using NFTs and using this tech. And so Form Farm, that piece that I did on async, was thinking about how do we, if everyone can have a say in what this composition is, how can we gamify that? How can we explore that? And how can we look at DAO as maybe art in a way? So that's been a fun exercise to see how that has taken shape. It's been a weird ride, but it's been a lot of fun to see how it works.
That piece is brilliant, and I think the market certainly recognized its brilliance. I want to pull on that thread that you touched on, because I think that was super, super interesting. Because you said something that caught me, and you said these are not buildings, and I've actually never even thought about that, right? Because of course I would presume that they were buildings, but I think, and I'd love for you to kind of touch on what you think the future role of an architect is, but almost like perhaps for me, like a game designer building frameworks for the experiences in virtual reality. If there is a world, well, there has to be some framework for existence within that world. So this is, this is an entirely new discipline, the idea of a metaverse architect. In how do you manipulate and design and deploy digital space for like a virtual reality sensory experience. The abstraction is much deeper, and I think the potential for the discipline is much more complex than many people are realizing at this stage. So maybe you have thoughts on kind of like the future of this word architect or metaverse architect.
Well, I'm just, this topic just is so exciting to me because I think I genuinely don't know. We can all speculate. I think that's what's so exciting about it, because the rules are being shaped in real time as people are creating towards those rules. And it's fast, it's changing all the time. And the rendering engines are changing. The polygon count is changing. Right. The kind of resolution of a VR headset is changing. And I think ultimately my hope is that in the same way that when I first stumbled into this world, I hope that the barriers between what an architect can be are broken down, so that it isn't this kind of elitist profession. It isn't this isolating profession that can only be experienced or given to a select few that can afford it, basically. I think that architecture should be practiced by gamers, by artists, by sculptors, by software engineers, by hackers. Like, it should be, we're creating these kind of environments that to the point about building or not building, I don't think that they're buildings, because they're, architecture traditionally is about this creation of a shelter, and it has to protect you from the elements, from weather, from materiality, from time. And if you're creating these kind of timeless environments that they certainly have different kind of restraints to them, or constraints, I mean, like polygon count, resolution, or even the radius when you put on your headset and you can only walk around a certain distance, that gets into different rules. And so I think where we are right now is still so early, because again, you're putting on this headset and you see something familiar. We're used to seeing, or we're trying now to create a recreation of what already exists, but just slightly less resolution in some respects. And I think like we're beginning, what the metaverse I think is ultimately doing is pushing past that to create a different kind of visual environment that won't look like what we know. Will be this kind of non-Euclidean world that might have like an endless hallway or an endless way of kind of navigating a space. It is about asking, what makes this different than where you are now? When you put on this headset or you walk into this metaverse plot or this space, my hope is that with each of these environments that I'm creating and that we are creating, I think it's a question of, what is this? Is this what makes this different from where you are? And I think if we can answer that question collectively as a kind of hive mind, to an earlier point, then I think we can make progress to kind of make it better environment, or challenge what we have already in the real world and make that better. I think if we continue to copy and paste what we have in reality virtually, we're going to have the same problems that we have in both environments. And so if this is a way to kind of challenge those big questions, if the technology that's backing it, this blockchain and cryptocurrency kind of technology, it's all a question. It's like, what can this do differently than what we have? And how can it maybe empower us to think and act differently, and maybe more collectively?
I am certainly convinced that we are at like the moment of like make or break like great awakening. Are people ready, like, to step up, evolve, and change, right? Obviously, this is core and fundamental to the museum. And now is probably, because we've kind of only touched on it, the time to reveal that Kirk is, in fact, the architect of the Museum of Crypto Art. So these are, questions that we continue to go back and forth with, right? I think a lot of this art, and I think, like the genius of whether it was CryptoPunks or Beeple or these things that have sold for these high price tags, was to get people to question, like, what is this? Is this art? This looks like nothing that I know or would ever consider valuable. So why are people valuing it in that way? It was kind of like the glory of the Rare Pepe project as well. All to kind of say that things are not exactly what they seem.
Right.
The deeper you dig, perhaps the more answers you find, but generally, the more questions you have.
Right.
So I am very conscious of this as well. I don't know if most people are ready for all of the questions they will encounter at the end of the rabbit hole, which leads us to something we were talking about earlier, that, what is, is this utopia or is this like a dystopia? Because I can see it very much cutting both ways. And I can see, entrenched powers that be, we see it already in the arts, like trying to continue to subvert the message to reassert and regain control. And of course, big question with Meta entering the space, like what type of sterile environments will they create for masses?
Yesterday, I was in the JP Morgan
Bank.
project that's in the Central. That was one of the weirdest weirdest experiences I've ever had in the metaverse to date. Like, there was a tiger walking around in a circle, a portrait of Jamie Dimon, and then like an infographic about how much blockchain innovation they've done over the years. And it's just like,
It's great. Super.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I still can't tell if it's just like, it's just such a surreal, bizarro land kind of approach. But to that point, I think we're going to see two very different approaches to the quote unquote metaverse. I think there's going to be, I hope there's not a single metaverse, first of all, that kind of encompasses. I generally think it's sort of an umbrella term, and lots of different apps are within that. Like, some can be virtual worlds, some can be other kind of interpretations of that. I think it's far too early for us to know exactly what, to be defining the terms in that way. But I think generally we're going to see a split, that there's the corporate sort of approach to a metaverse, which looks at users as commodities that they can kind of extract value from, that can be more of the Meta, more of the Walmart sort of metaverse approach. And then there's going to be this, maybe more of a grassroots sort of approach from blockchain native companies, like the metaverses that we've been, or the virtual worlds that we've been building, and more of the crypto voxels, the Somnium spaces, these places that are of and for the values that are more open source, more collaborative, more integrated with the community that fuels it. And I think we're just going to see this rift, where you're going to have a corporate kind of approach to what this can be and do, and then you're going to have more of a community oriented structure that and they're all going to kind of rub against one another for a while. And that might be the utopia dystopia friction.
I was going to say, like, rifts like this are inherently pretty dangerous. But I agree, like, crypto exists in parallel to like traditional banking. Crypto art exists like in parallel. I think if we are not thinking about and designing systems in parallel, then when there is crisis in one, people need that optionality to be able to jump.
Right.
I came into this, of course, with the idea of like free and open metaverse, and an exploration of like identity within that space.
Mhm.
So let's go back to like the idea of your goal for public space, and like what does a what is the purpose of a public space in the metaverse? I don't know if you want to talk about like Agora specifically as a good example.
Sure. I think in terms of public space in Agora, where the Museum of Crypto Art is hosting its Genesis collection currently, I think that space was very much about that build was about a couple different things. It was using a kind of old language of the crypto art scene, which was this QR code, and then extrapolating that into kind of a 3D environment that was very much attempting to morph a QR code into a building. To me, the QR code is this incredibly prolific pattern that has helped cryptocurrency and the blockchain kind of environment be shared and absorbed. And I think that was just a fun exercise in some ways to see what a building could look like if it plays off of those themes. But with the space and with what you guys wanted to achieve, what we wanted to build was this kind of public environment where you can host lots of different discussions, have people meet to talk about digital art, have different events and kind of tours. And what I've loved about this space is that we've hosted so many different events there with people from all over the world coming to either speak about their art that they see on the wall,
Yeah.
or about an idea that they have. And everyone is from all over the place. And I think that's something, and they're all from different backgrounds. So, pulling on an earlier part of this conversation too, that there's this hive mind that public spaces, say in like where I'm from in Brooklyn or somewhere else, you can only have some kind of local conversation there. But if these metaverse worlds are providing a public space for the entire world to gather and have a conversation, I don't think we have an idea yet of how impactful that kind of hive mind will be and what will resonate out of that. You're getting knowledge from all over the world, all these different disciplines. I think that's what's exciting about Agora, which is Greek for public marketplace. And it was meant to kind of foster those sort of interdisciplinary conversations, get people to talk about what's going on.
I'll
Yeah.
say, like, it is crazy because that is literally happening. Like when I tell people
Yeah.
what I do and I bring up that Somnium Space link on my phone and go inside, like, there are people inside the museum, like, walking around, and they're like, what are those? I'm like, those are people. Like,
Those are people.
those are people. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
those are people walking around. Like, you want to talk to them, like, type something. And then you can
Right.
go back and you can see the conversation. And like, I'll never forget, and I was talking with Artur about this earlier, like being in the museum one day, and then like a snowman approached me, and it was like, Steve from Ukraine. I'm like, great. Like, me and this snowman are gonna go like check out this museum. So there is a whimsy, of course, and a magic, and like an inexplicable like connection that the space is facilitating, because also it's open 24/7, 365. It's completely persistent, right? Like, the chat stays, there's people in there. There have been tens of thousands of visits to the museum. And the crazy thing is, it really costs us nothing to keep it up and operating.
Yeah, it's free. It's just like having a kind of cultural place, a point like that people can access. It's never been that way. It's always been a gate in between that experience for people. And that's true with any traditional museum that's out there currently. There's a tremendous cost associated with experiencing culture in society today, and I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's, or what's maybe being kept behind those doors maybe isn't that relevant in some cases. So it really depends. Like, if it is sort of this thing that you have to pay to experience, is it It's so yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think what crypto art is doing and how it's empowering and infusing people with just incredible experiences around digital art, it's just it's really transformative. And I think it's yeah, I love that the museum is this kind of meeting place where you can have all these kind of different sorts of interactions with people.
And then, not only did you do this and like birth and give this space, but like this room and floor project, which took me a long time to understand. I see the brilliance of it, of course. Like you are actually now giving this concept to people effectively in a box to run their own public space.
Right.
So please, like, explain that and let people kind of know what that's about.
Well, this is one of those things I was saying before. It's not possible without all of these different skill sets coming together. Like Renee is just a wizard, an incredibly talented human being, and his team building this infrastructure for rooms and floor. And I'm so excited about rooms because we it solves a lot of problems, I think, in the quote unquote metaverse right now. What rooms are these 3D artifacts, these 3D environments that are heavily programmable, very adaptable, and very agile, and very connected. And I think what we have now is a little bit of a bottleneck with virtual land being growingly inaccessible for people who
Yeah.
do want to experiment. And it's no longer what it was a couple of years ago, where you could pay $100 and have a plot and do whatever you want on it. Now it's $20,000, and it's or 10
At
grand or more,
least,
and
yeah.
it's not that restricts, I think, a lot of engagement and growth, and it certainly caters to a totally different audience. So on top of that too, a lot of virtual worlds, the artifacts that you're putting on top of them, they're not in and of themselves NFTs in most cases. They're 3D models, and they're not really tied to any sort of on-chain activity or anything that you can really keep track of. I think that's changing. That's been challenged a lot in the last few months, and it's really exciting to see. And I think with Room, that's something that we're really, really sort of embracing. That the architecture can be an NFT. It can exist across all of these different virtual worlds, and you can customize it in incredible ways to showcase a digital art collection that you own, or that a combination of people own who want to come together to have a show or have an event or have a meeting. And I think that is just, I'm so excited for what rooms are going to do, because I think it's agnostic towards the kind of virtual land thing discussion, where it can exist in virtual land, but it doesn't have to. And I hope that opens the doors for a lot of people who want to create these spaces to connect, but might not be able to afford land.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so there's so much to be said about rooms, but I think it's that kind of like connectivity that I'm excited about, and also the fact that it's an NFT, and architecture hasn't been able to be an NFT much yet. So that's going to be a big thing to open up.
I think you touched on a very important point in that, and this is what I've come to a realization on recently, is that I think digital land should and will be as ubiquitous as a web page, right? We
Right.
talk about all of this as the spatial web. I think, blockchain based land, the idea of scarce digital land, is a bit of it. It has become certainly more ego and trophy, right? And like attaching one's name to that world. And I think that's all good and fine, but at the end of the day, you are effectively attaching that value to either a foundation or a series of developers that are going to continue to innovate and effectively cater to people who can afford it and are not necessarily the most creative.
Right.
Which, I see some value, I think, in like centralized worlds, but really, it should be everybody having their own space, as all artists should have their own contract, as everybody should be kind of like their own marketplace. There is a way
Right.
to empower the individual outside of like the aggregation under a centralized brand.
Yeah, and we've. I think this is where these virtual worlds are being designed almost exactly like we do in the real world, and I think that's part
Right.
of the problem.
Right.
You're creating an environment that has, first of all, flat 2D land, which makes almost no sense to me. If we have endless digital creativity that we can do, why not have, house moving castle or some sort of like
Yeah.
Miyazaki kind of like environment with that. But I think like you have those problems. These are artifacts of the real world that are transferring over. It's a natural first thing to do or to create, but we have the benefit of this infrastructure that can be treated differently. We can treat these things differently. I think it would be great if you give every single person with an Ethereum address a plot of land, but if they trade this land, maybe if it's people are flipping it, it moves to the periphery of this world, and those who build are more closer to the spawn point in the center. Like we should do an experiment differently with how scarcity works and how kind of access works. I think these worlds are going to look a lot different too in a few years. I hope.
What a cool concept. I think everything is a reimagination of value, and I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of like the ills of this modern world and this physical world are tied to like perceived rights to land and ownership of land and resources, and like the fighting and competition over that perception of title and ownership to that land. Right? We are entering digitally abundant space. It is effectively limitless. It is, like, in my mind, analogous to a web page that ties to a spatial web in which anybody should be free to design and create whatever, from like an ice palace to a bat cave to like, a princess castle in the sky. Like whatever
Right.
speaks in the same way that you dress yourself, you should have free right and reign to design whatever monolith that like speaks to your digital soul and identity. And of course, like artwork is all part of that. But it's cool, and like every time we speak, I just get so enamored with the limitless of it all. You make me think incredibly differently, so just like very, very grateful to take the time with you.
Oh, likewise. I mean, whenever we internally with MOCA have these conversations, that's what gives me fuel as a creative to challenge and ask new questions. And I think that's it's just the beauty of the space is the conversations that happen that then provoke a kind of creative project afterwards. So yeah, I love having those
Super.
conversations.
All right, I'm gonna send us home. I'm Colborn Bell. I'm here on behalf of the Museum of Crypto Art. This is Untitled XYZ, Kirk Finkel. Want to thank DMINTI for hosting us and having this conversation as well. And we will see you all for the next episode.
Breaking news.